TVR. So okay, so this episode we're going to basically catch up on what's happened since I think episode 3. So last time we had the chassis and all of the suspension and the drive line, the drive chain, the differential, prop shaft and drive shafts. They were all fitted. Car was on axle stands, the wheels were on. Since then, spent a couple of days in the garage, basically getting ready to refurbish the chassis, I suppose. So, what we're going to do is just have a quick run around the car, have a look at some of the bits, talk about some of the problems that I encountered while taking it apart, and then leave it there, I think. Okay, so let's go and pick the camera up. Let's have a talk. So, initially what we did is we started taking off the rear suspension. So the shock absorbers and wishbones were all mounted on here, here, here and here. Okay, we also had some flexible brake line that came out through here and the handbrake cable that comes through this hole here. Okay, so the handbrake, obviously there's one both sides for the brake caliper, locates on a couple of mounting points. So you can just see on the chassis, just down here and also on here. And on this side, the tensioning nut is how you adjust the position of the handbrake in the car. There's two nuts on the actual handbrake cable. So that was all slackened off. The handbrake cable was taken away. Then effectively what then happened was that the brakes were taken off the car, and then the strip down of the wishbone. So if we come over here, you can see excuse me, some of the parts that we've had to take. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to keep them in the in separate piles for the sides of the car. So this side here is the passenger side or near side, and this side over here was the driver's side. So what problems did we encounter? Well, there was a couple of tight bolts where I'd used Por 15 on some of the suspension mounting bolts in the past. So once I'd removed all the other bits and pieces and there were just mechanical components, I used a propane torch on a couple of the nuts just to burn the paint off, and that then made for a more easy disassembly. There's a couple of things I've still got to do. This drive shaft here, the splined section, or the part that goes through the hub or stub shaft, whatever it's called, this section here hasn't come away from the drive shaft. I think it's held on with a bit of rust, so that's going to come away a bit later on. And also what I've also got is I've got a whole load of suspension bushes here and here that need to be taken apart. These toe-in adjusters, they were these were okay. I managed to get those undone, not too difficult at all. A good little tip is that I found here on these diff mounts here, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, I used a 40mm Starrett hole saw cutter, which I cut through from both sides, and that fitted exactly into the bush and just left the metal outer. I was then able to cut longitudinally down one side with a hacksaw, and then it just collapsed and popped out. So I did that, and I did that the same on the other side, which is in that bucket somewhere. Okay, so the other issue that we had from last episode is the differential. Okay, this is one of the problem areas on the car. It's got a bit of an oil leak, which I think's coming from this breather here. Okay, I don't think it's actually leaking anywhere else. It's also quite heavily rusted on here. One of the bolts I was able to undo once I'd managed to pull the differential and prop shaft out as a single unit, but the other ones I just couldn't get the nuts off, because basically the nuts, they were so close inside there that you couldn't get a ring spanner over the nuts, so you were trying to undo it with an open-ended spanner, and that wasn't possible because they were just rounding off. So what I did is I used a grinder and basically a cut through You know, you can see one there cut through a nut there into the bolt itself. There's a typical bolt, and then eventually they just let go, and then you can unscrew them out. So that's all come apart. That was okay. So what did we do next? We then basically moved up to the front of the car, okay, and we took the front wishbones apart, front wishbones off rather. Also had to split the ball joints and basically just disassembled this area. So you've got the shock absorber that mounts on there, wishbones here, here, here and here, and that came apart. I used I don't know what you call it really, a sort of ball joint splitter, a large a fork to actually break the ball joints top and bottom. The one I had originally wasn't big enough to do the one at the top, so I managed to get a bigger one from Euro Car Parts or something a year or so ago, and they came surprisingly easy. One of my pet hates is ball joints and splitting track rod ends and things like that, but they're surprisingly easy how they came apart this time round, so I was quite pleased and relieved about that. So that that all came apart. So if we go in here, we can have a little look. So into here, so we've got separate buckets here. So I'm using, so there's the front hub, shock absorber, some ball joints and pieces. I use these monster 6-pot calipers that you can see here from High Spec. Quite like those. They stop the car nicely. Just put that bolt back in the box. Same parts in there. Got the wishbones here, and all the ball joints are hidden in there. So what we managed to do is we managed to basically try and put things in sensible buckets so that I can at least got half a chance of working out how it all goes back together again. So I also took out from the front of the car as well the steering rack. So I run power steering in this car, so it mounts on these bolts here and here. Okay, so we've got the steering rack lying there on the floor. Next to it is the handbrake cable. Okay, we've got the front anti-roll bar, which is now off. Behind there's the rear anti-roll bar on the radiator. And coming round here, apart from the exhaust that's lying on the floor, we've got the various buckets of pieces that have been taken off the car during the previous episodes. So we tried to keep things fairly segregated to at least give me half a chance to work out how it all goes back together again. So what have we got to do now? Well, at the moment the engine is sat there on a crane, so what we've done is loosened off a few of the engine mount bolts here and here. Also I've taken apart the gearbox linkage which sits across here. Okay, these are the parts that are down there on the floor. I've also taken off this saddle piece which fits underneath the gearbox, which is mounted on these bolts here and here with these bolts. And we're getting ready to lift. So fairly soon, later on this morning, we're going to be taking the engine and gearbox out, hopefully as one unit. So we'll see how we get on with that. There's a couple of jobs. I'm just waiting for someone to come round in the next half an hour or so. We've still got this bush to remove. This is the rear diff bush. So I don't think I'm able to necessarily to get in there with my 40mm Starrett cutter. So I've got a friend that I think's made a tool for actually taking that out. So perhaps when I see it, we might do a little video on that. Perhaps, I'm not sure. So got that left to do. We're going to take the engine and gearbox out. Then we've got to very carefully photograph where all these brake lines go and the fuel lines which are on the other side of the car, and also run along here as well and underneath. So they all need to be carefully photographed, and then get it ready for taking away and shot blasting. Now I'm not sure what other people do. What I'm intending to do is to put screws back into these threaded holes into the chassis before it goes off for bead blasting to keep the threads clean. But I'm not sure whether that's necessary or not, but I was just going to do that as a precaution. So like things like up here, put bolts in there, put bolts in there. I'm not too worried about these because I suspect these are all going to get chopped out when the outriggers and bits are replaced on the chassis. And that is pretty much it. Thank you for watching.